Okay, welcome. This is Chapter 13, the Lucky 13, the last chapter in the entire course. Yay! This is about stakeholder management. So you guys know how this works. We're going to start with the learning objectives on page 495. Understand the importance of project stakeholder management. Discuss the process of identifying how to create a stakeholder register and how to perform stakeholder analysis. Describe the contents of a stakeholder's management plan. Understand the process of managing. Explain the methods for controlling. And discuss software. And as always, whenever they talk about stakeholder, this is the image that pops in my mind. Is always, somebody driving a stake through the heart of a vampire. But that's just the way I think. Which says an awful lot about me, doesn't it? Okay, so the opening case. The opening case is... There was a person who worked for a company and they got downsized, and so they became an independent contractor. And then they got hired back onto the company and started making recommendations for this new project. And the previous boss, a person used to be their boss, didn't like the idea at all and basically blew up and said, why the heck would you recommend that? You know darn well that blah 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 blah. Anyway, the person who used to be the boss is also the person who's hiring the consultant. So there was a huge disconnect in expectations of what the consultant was going to do and what the stakeholder thought they were going to do. And that's what this is all about. Okay, so you kind of sort of think that we've already kind of covered this, really, because we've had one on human resources, right? We've had an entire chapter talking about how to, do human resource. And we had an entire chapter on communication. So isn't that enough? Well, not when it comes to stakeholders. Stakeholders are special. They're the ones who make the most impact on your work. So, yeah, we need a separate chapter on them. Okay. So, the purpose of stakeholder management. To identify all people that are affected, analyze their expectations, and engage them in decisions. Okay, that's basically the purpose for this. And so... let's just talk in general about how projects work, right? So, automation projects typically have an awful lot of very specialized jobs, right? I mean, and it's likely that if you were, consider this as a construction contract, right? Well, when you go in and do a construction project, no one's losing their job. In fact, you're hiring them, right? Okay. But in an automation project, it is very much likely that the success of this project that you're installing, a piece of software or whatever it is, this management system, is going to cost people their jobs. Yeah. So, do you think maybe there's people involved that do not want this thing to succeed and perhaps will even try to sabotage the system? Okay, yeah. So, clearly, not all stakeholders are for the project. And then secondly, it's very possible that some of the stakeholders are going to actively attempt to make this thing fail so they can keep their jobs. Yes, that's a reality. On page 497, they talk about the little what went wrong box. Good stuff in there. They talk about, buy-in blues. What if you're talking about projects that go south? One of the things that'll happen is no one really bought into the idea. It's sort of like, oh man, we got to do this. Well, the company higher up in the company said we need to do this. Well, okay, I guess that's what we'll do. But no one was really interested in it. No one really cared, and quite frankly, didn't want it. Now, I've been in a situation where we had a perfectly good system. It worked great for us. It was custom-made software. Did precisely what we wanted it to do. And we were forced to replace it with a system that was less capable. Wow. Boy, were we excited to install that software, weren't we? Right. Okay. Short-term profits. Oftentimes people make decisions on a project that's, the quarterly stockholder, report. It's the only thing they're really interested in. They don't care that, they're eating the seed corn, so to speak. And won't have anything in the spring to plant. Overachieving. Okay, this project is this big and it's going to do all these wonderful things. Try not to do everything all at once. Kind of rein things in. Do exactly what the thing's supposed to do. Don't go crazy. And the last one, which is very, very important on how things can go south in a hurry, is if you disrespect any of the stakeholders, particularly the employees whose jobs are being lost. I mean, if you just cast them aside saying, well, tough shit. I'm sorry you lost your job. Go away. You bother me. If that's your attitude, well, this project is definitely not going to work. On the other hand, if you said, okay, now we have this job training system and we have an intern system and we're going to be able to cover all the people who are affected and blah, 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 blah. You see what I'm getting at? So disrespecting laid off workers will definitely, first of all, get you in the newspaper and on TV. But that's definitely how a project could go wrong. Okay, as always, there's these 4 sections, how to do this, initiating, planning, executing, and monitoring. So identifying is all about basically trying to figure out the best way to manage stakeholders. It's to produce that stakeholder register where you list them all and then try to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing here to handle these particular guys. Planning is basically talking about, picking a particular strategy and producing that stakeholder management plan. Managing, if you say managing stakeholders, that sounds a little presumptuous, doesn't it? So let's just say managing stakeholders engagement. That makes a heck of a lot more sense. So managing engagement is all about trying to figure out how to satisfy each individual stakeholder's individual needs. Now, it should be fairly obvious that not everyone's going to agree. So you may not be able to you can probably figure out what they want, but you may not be able to provide them what they want. Okay. And then controlling, of course, is just monitoring how you're doing and making adjustments to the plan as we go. Okay. On page 498, they start off with the first one, which is the initiating thing. All right. So categories of stakeholders, we kind of sort of talked about this before. Internal stakeholders. So the internal stakeholders could be, the sponsor, whoever the sponsor is for the project. That's a very powerful person. And hopefully if they're very enthusiastic and give a rousing speech at the beginning of the project, then things will probably go pretty good from then. The team members, you're going to hire people to be on your team. They're obviously stakeholders. That makes sense. Users, the individual users for the system, you could say customers, but if I'm talking about a corporate system, I'm probably talking about, the people inside your own organization that have to use this new system. Upper management, right? These are all internal guys. External. Well, then this could be your paying customers, okay? Your customer is, let's say you're putting in a new help desk, okay? That's your project. A new tech support help desk set up. And so are your customers going to be happy with what you're doing? And if they're not, well, they're going to vote with their feet. They're going to leave. Okay. Competitors. Now, this is the weird one. Yes, competitors definitely are stakeholders. Okay. But you don't invite them to the meetings, right? Okay. But they're definitely stakeholders. You need to know what they're doing. Okay, cool. Just to continue down the list here. Suppliers, it could be that the suppliers know more about what's going on in the industry than you do. I mean, for example, I tell the story about from the contracting chapter about some vendor who's buying buying steel, and that's what he does for a living. And he comes to you and says, "Man, the price of steel is really going crazy here, and I need some price adjustments in my contract." Okay, well. He's buying and selling steel for a living, so yeah, he knows. He probably knows more than you do. So your suppliers could be a very, very useful and helpful source of information. So therefore, they are stakeholders. Okay, there's some other ones. If you turn to the next page, there's some more. A bigger list, a better list, and they add a couple of them that are kind of sort of important. One is labor unions. Okay, that would be a very good one. For example, particularly if you're doing an automation project which results in loss of blue-collar workers' jobs, okay? And the other is special interest groups. Perhaps you have a Sierra Club thing or some environmental thing, or I don't know what it is, but the point is you can have lots and lots of people on the outside who have a vested interest in whether this thing works or not. I mean, how difficult is it for people to go out and build a new factory or someplace? They have to buy the land, and people around them are going to be hooping and hollering, no, you can't buy my land, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you could have an organized resistance, so to speak, in the community. Okay, so it should be fairly obvious that not all stakeholders are going to be known when you start putting together your stakeholder list. I mean, you say, well, here's a list, but you may miss some, because there could be some that you have no idea. They just pop up. They'll send you a letter saying, well, we disagree with your decision to do X, and you go, really? Wow, I didn't know. Okay, that happens. But even if you can't decide if you've got them all or not, one thing you can do is you can rank them. I mean, you could go crazy here with making a stakeholder register, right? I mean, you could put everybody on the entire planet in there. So the idea is you need to go through and figure out those that have the most direct involvement. Okay, so not everybody, because that would be just too much work. But if you had the folks with the most direct involvement, the ones that are likely to pop up their little heads. Okay, so we've talked about this stakeholder register before. So here's just a list, and it kind of makes sense, right? They have their person's name, what their position is, whether they're internal or external, what their current role in, and then some contact information. Okay, so this is a way of identifying, right? Identifying and classifying stakeholders. So some sort of identification where you just come up with a list of folks, and some sort of an assessment. Behind the scenes, this is kind of a very short, right, stakeholder register thing, but you're going to later use this to basically do an assessment, figure out, what are their communication requirements, okay? What are their expectations of communication? How much influence do they actually have? I mean, for example, I would suspect this project sponsor, the VP of operations, is probably going to have one heck of a lot of influence on this project. Cool. This supplier down here, probably not quite so much, right? All right, so some sort of a ranking on how much they have. And then, of course, you could include, internal and external like they have, and you could even throw another column in there and say pro or con. Are they for this project or against this project? All right, that would be all good. Okay, so which brings us to this whole concept of stakeholder analysis. Now that you've kind of built the list, you need to start fleshing it out, so to speak, to figure out how this all works. So they talk about several categories, all right? From the least is they're unaware. Yeah, they're a stakeholder, but they're completely unaware of this project. The next one is resistant. Yeah, I don't really like this project. The next one is neutral. Neutral means just like, I don't care. Yeah, you guys can do it or not, I don't care. The next one is supportive. Yeah, generally I think that's a good idea. And then the last one is leading. They're leading the way. They're charging the way. So those type of categories or analysis would kind of help you prioritize this stakeholder register. They show a thing called a power grid. It's fairly obvious, but here's their interest and here's how much influence and power they have. Okay, so clearly, whoever number 8 is, and I don't really think this chart necessarily refers back to the other one, but whoever 8 is, they have no particular interest in the project, and they don't really have much influence either, so what the heck, right? Those people, you just kind of monitor them and make sure they don't pop into any other categories. Now let's look way over here in this corner. Whoever number 1 is, they have extreme interest and extreme power. Man, you better be managing these guys really closely, because if something happens here, it's definitely going to impact your project. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so you know how this stuff works.